welcome back to Teen Story Share. This week we're continuing A Northern Light by Jennifer Donnelly. And in the past two chapters we have been in Mattie's life in the past, a few months before she started working at the Glenmore Hotel. And now we're jumping back to the present at the Glenmore, where the body of Grace Brown has just been discovered in the lake next to the hotel. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, then please scroll down to the description where you'll find links to the last few chapters of the book so far. And we're just going to dive right in. Mattie, what in blazes are you doing? It's Cook. She startles me so I nearly jump out of my shoes. Nothing, ma'am, I stammer, slamming the cellar door shut. I was just... That ice cream done? Very nearly, ma'am. Don't ma'am me to death, and don't let me see you up out of that chair again until your work's done. Cook is snappish, more so than usual. We all are. Help and guests alike, snappish and sad. Except old Mrs. Ellis, who is furious and feels she's entitled to a refund because the dead body in the parlor is interfering with her enjoyment of the day. I walk back to the ice cream churn and feel Grace Brown's letters hanging heavy in my skirt pocket. Why did Cook have to come back into the kitchen just then? 2 more seconds and I would have been down the cellar stairs and in front of the huge coal furnace. The Glenmore is a modern hotel with gas lights in every room and a gas stove in the kitchen, but the furnace, which heats all the water the hotel uses, burns coal. The letters would have caught immediately. I could have been done with them. And ever since Grace Brown handed them to me, I have sorely wanted to be done with them. She gave them to me yesterday afternoon on the porch, after I'd brought her a lemonade. I'd felt sorry for her. I could tell she'd been crying. I knew why, too. She'd had a fight with her beau at dinner. It was over a chapel. She wanted to go and find a chapel, but he wanted to go boating. She'd refused the drink at first, saying she couldn't pay for it, but I said she didn't have to, figuring what Mrs. Morrison didn't know wouldn't hurt her. And then, just as I was turning to go back inside, she asked me to wait. She opened her gentleman friend's suitcase and pulled a bundle of letters from it. She took a few more from her purse, undid the ribbon around them, tied all the letters together, and asked me to burn them. I was so taken aback by her request, I wasn't able to answer. Guests wanted all sorts of strange things. Omelets with 2.5 eggs. Not 2, not 3, 2.5. Maple syrup for their baked potatoes. Blueberry muffins without any blueberries in them. Trout for supper as long as it didn't taste like fish. I did all that they asked of me with a smile. But no one had ever asked me to burn letters, and I couldn't imagine explaining it to Cook. Miss, I can't, I'd started to say. She took hold of my arm. Burn them, please, she whispered. Promise me you will. No one can ever see them, please. And then she pressed them into my hands, and her eyes were so wild that they scared me, and I quickly nodded yes. Of course I will, miss. I'll do it right away. And then he, Carl or Chester or whatever he called himself, shouted to her from the lawn, Billy, you coming? I got a boat. I'd put the letters in my pocket and forgot all about them until I went upstairs later in the day to change into a fresh apron. I slipped them under my mattress, figuring I would wait to burn them, just in case Grace Brown changed her mind and asked for them back. Guests could be like that. They'd get cross with you for bringing them the butterscotch pudding they'd ordered because now they wanted chocolate. And somehow it was your fault if their shirts were too stiff after they'd asked for extra starch. I didn't want Grace Brown complaining to Mrs. Morrison that I'd burned her letters when she hadn't meant me to. But Grace hadn't changed her mind, or complained, and now she never would. I'd run upstairs to get the letters right after Grace's body was brought in, and I'd been waiting ever since for Cook to turn her back. It was nearly 5 now. We'd be serving supper in another hour, and I knew I wouldn't have the time to run down cellar, even if I did get the chance. The door from the dining room swings open and Franny Hill marches in, an empty tray on her shoulder. Lord, I don't see how sitting on your backside watching an illustrated lecture about castles in France can make people so hungry, she says. It's just boring old slides and a lantern and somebody holding forth. I must have put 6 dozen cookies on that tray. They ate 'em all? Cook asks her. And drank 2 pots of coffee, a jug of lemonade, and a pot of tea. And now they're clamoring for more. Nerves, Cook says. People eat too much when they're nervy. Watch out for table 6, Matt. He's at it again, Fran whispers as she passes by. That's our name for Mr. Maxwell, a guest who always takes table 6 in the dining room because it's in a dark corner. He has trouble keeping his hands and other bits to himself. The door bangs open again. It's Ada. Man from the Boonville paper's here. Mrs. Morrison said I should bring him coffee and sandwiches. Weaver is on her heels. Mr. Morrison says to tell you he canceled the campfire and sing-along tonight, so you don't need to do the refreshments for it. And he called off the hike to Dart's Lake tomorrow morning, so there's no picnic to pack. But he wants to have an ice cream social for the children tomorrow afternoon, and he wants sandwiches for the searchers when they come in off the lake tonight. Cook wipes the sweat off her forehead with the back of her hand. She puts water on to boil and opens a metal canister on the counter next to the stove. Weaver, I told you to bring up some coffee this morning. Doesn't anyone listen to me? She grumbles. I'll get it, I nearly shout. The large burlap sack of coffee beans is kept in the cellar. Her eyes narrow. You are just determined to go down cellar, aren't you? What are you after? Maybe she's got Royal Loomis hidden down there, Fran says, smirking. Standing behind the coal bin, waiting for a kiss, Ada giggles. Scratching his head and wondering who turned out the lights, Weaver adds. My cheeks burn. You stay where you are and finish that ice cream, Cook says to me. Weaver, go get the coffee. I pick up the churn's lid and look inside. Not even close. I'd been cranking so long I thought my arm would fall off. Weaver had already cranked a gallon of strawberry, and Fran had done vanilla. The kitchen was busy enough with the hotel and all the cottages full, busier still in the hours since the body was recovered. Mrs. Morrison had informed us that the sheriff was coming all the way from Herkimer tomorrow, and the coroner, and there were bound to be men from the city papers too. Cook was determined that the Glenmore not be found wanting. She'd baked enough bread and biscuits to feed every man, woman, and child in the county, plus a dozen pies, 6 layer cakes, and 2 pans of rice pudding. Weaver disappears into the cellar. As he does, I hear gunshots coming from the lake, 3 in a row. Ada and Franny draw near to me. If he was still alive, someone would have found him by now, Fran says, voicing what we are all thinking. Or he would have found his way back. Those gunshots carry. I looked in the register, Ada whispers. Their last names weren't the same. They were traveling together, but I don't think they were married. I bet they were eloping, I say. I served them at dinner time. I heard them talk about a chapel. Did you, Matt? Ada asks. Yes, I did, I say, telling myself that fighting is talking, sort of. Maybe Grace Brown's father didn't like Carl Graham, I add. Maybe he didn't have any money. Or maybe she was promised to another but loved Carl Graham, so they ran away to the North Woods to get married. And decided to take a romantic boat ride together first, to declare their love for each other on the lake, Ada adds wistfully. And maybe he reached over the water to pick some pond lilies for her, Franny says. And the boat tipped and they fell out and he tried to save her, but he couldn't. She slipped from his grasp, I say. Oh, it's so sad, Mattie, so sad and romantic, Ada cries. And then he drowned too. He gave up struggling because he didn't want to live when he saw that she was gone, and now they'll be together forever. Star-crossed lovers, just like Romeo and Juliet, I say. Together forever, Franny echoes. At the bottom of Big Moose Lake, just as dead as 2 doornails, Cook says. She has ears on her like a jackrabbit and is always listening when you don't think she is. You let that be a lesson to you, Frances Hill, she adds. Girls who sneak off with boys end badly. You hear me? Fran blinks. Why, Mrs. Hennessy, I'm sure I don't know what you mean. She says she is such a good actress she should be on stage. And I'm sure you do. Where were you 2 nights ago? Round midnight? Right here, of course. In bed, asleep. Not sneaking off to the Waldheim to meet Ed Compo, by any chance? Franny's caught. She turns as red as a cherry. I expect Cook to scold her soundly. Instead, she takes Fran's chin in her hand and says, A boy wants to go somewhere with you? You tell him to call on you proper, or not at all. You hear? Yes, ma'am, Fran mumbles, and from the look on her face and Ada's, I know they are as unsettled as I am at seeing signs of softness from Cook. I feel even worse when she brushes at her eye on her way to the cellar stairs. Weaver, she bellows down them, you fetching that coffee or growing it? Hurry up. I look at the thin gold ring with a chipped opal and 2 dull garnets on my left hand. I've never thought it pretty, but suddenly I'm glad, very glad, that Royal gave it to me. Glad, too, that he always calls for me at the Glenmore's kitchen door where everyone can see him. I go back to cranking the ice cream and embellishing my romantic and tragic story, writing it all out in my mind. Carl Graham and Grace Brown were in love. That's why they were here. They were eloping, not sneaking, no matter what Cook says. I see Carl Graham smiling as he reaches for the pond lilies. Then I see the boat capsize and him struggle valiantly to save the woman he loves. I don't see Grace's tear-stained face anymore, or the tremble in her hands as she gives me her letters. I don't wonder what's in them or why they're addressed to Chester Gillette, not Carl Graham. I start to think that maybe I never heard Grace Brown call Carl Graham Chester at all, that I only imagined it. I end my story with Grace and Carl being buried next to each other in a fancy cemetery in Albany, and their parents being so sad they ever stood in the young lover's way. I decide that I like it. It's a new kind of story for me. The kind that stitches things up nicely and leaves no ends dangling and makes me feel placid instead of all stirred up. The kind that has a happy ending, or at least as happy an ending as is possible with the heroine dead and the hero presumed so. The kind of story I once told Miss Wilcox was a lie. The kind I said I would never ever write. All right, next week will be our final chapter that we're reading out of this book, when we'll go back in time to Mattie's life on the farm before the Glenmore. I hope that you are enjoying this book so far, and if you would like to find out the rest of the story, this book will be available for checkout after next Friday. Have a good weekend. Bye.